sugar, spice, and an academic paradise. This was the makeup of this mix for the forthcoming issue of Kunstlicht. But the editorial team purposefully added an extra ingredient to the mix: magic. Thus, Spellbound was born. It rumbles, tumbles, and spins because it has so much to say. Get your copy now at Tijdschrift Kunstlicht.nl.
The throning of cosmic connections. When you look across the room and look someone in the eye and you realize that they are a kindred spirit, but it also becomes very dangerous to try and monopolize your being in regards to this type of, planet. Do you ever feel like you're going backwards?
This intergenerational thread of Woman X's voices, my great-grandmother, my mother, and my grandma were sharing. Am I being myself or my grandma? Is she talking through me? Am I taking her shape or is she taking mine? There's a seed inside me, almost like a possession.
Like a parasite, a ghost. Are you hosting one another? Are you meeting in the middle of the space?
Host the residues of your childhood.
Sharing your shape, your form. Where do you go when taken over? Your body taking these things in, and it feels very much like water. Incontainable, the shape of you and others becoming back. Incontainable, the shape of you and others becoming back. Incontainable, the shape of you and others becoming back.
This feels, again, very monstrous, because are you luring them in? Are they luring you in? Who change yourself to meet their experience?
Society, sameness and positivity and affirmation of your beliefs is an idea that you can fully know something. Then the monstrous becomes the oppressor rather than the divergent.
We are often host to a multiplicity, to a herd of different bodies.
I guess that can only be achieved by being continuously polymorphic. There are hosts that expect the metamorphosis to take place in the visitor.
Like you adapt to my home and to the narrative of the story. Our task is to be the shapeshifter.
Your task is to be the shapeshifter. Is to be the shapeshifter. Is to be the shapeshifter.
Hello and welcome to the launch of the latest issue of Kunstlicht, Spellbound. I'm Anna Seibeck-Thor-Petersen and this is Joyce Pote, and we're the editors-in-chief of Kunstlicht. However, Kunstlicht is an effort of many, many people, and therefore we have the honor of introducing you to a few of the contributors tonight. But first of all, thank you to the artist, animator, and DJ Savan Mohammed Arman, which made the trailer you watched as the very first thing. And also thank you to Amalia Calderon and Naomi Collier-Broms for the spell on welcoming and hospitality.
And talking about hospitality, we first and foremost like to say a big, big thank you to Felix Meritus for hosting us tonight as part of their cultural emergency hospital. We're really, really happy that we've been that we're part of this program. So thank you. They offer all the facilities to us for free. So we literally couldn't have been here without you. So I'm going to talk you through the format of today. We're going to have a launch in 3 parts. First, Anna and I are introducing the issue. So who or what is Kunstlicht, and what is Spellbound about the issue. After that, we are watching a mini lecture by one of our contributors, Dunja Nizovic. And we close with a panel discussion by Fabian Cheng and Fabian Rakhmadiev, who also wrote for us for this issue. the different parts will all be framed by different spells in a video format. So Dunya's talk will be framed by 2 videos by Emilia Ethimu, and the entire launch is framed by 2 videos by Amalia and Naomi. So we have a welcoming spell, but also a farewell spell. So to start off our launch, who or what is Kunstlicht? Like Anna said, Kunstlicht is not only the 2 of us. It's a big, big group of people, but it's been around for a long time. We've been around for 41 years. We were founded in the 1980s by students of the VU, art history students, and we're still affiliated with the VU as of now. We have a team of about 15 editors, all volunteer-based, who are MA students at the VU, but also young professionals who are very passionate and who are very involved from like the first call for papers to the last proofreading that we do. So we're very grateful to be here. And Spellbound, this issue, is actually a collective issue. Normally we work with guest editors, so we have thematic issues, but this issue was brought about by the editorial team. We've been talking about it for a couple of years, and because we turned 40 last year but couldn't celebrate it, we decided to do an issue on magic, rituals, and that's how Spellbound came to be.
Yeah, so as Joyce mentioned, this issue was proposed by the editors, and at first glance, of course, we wanted to do it because it's for fun and something we were all interested in, but it was also because we saw it everywhere, from like in our private lives on social media to our professional lives in the arts and culture industry. Magic or spiritualism, we're using the terms a bit loosely here in the beginning, has emerged as a pop cultural phenomena. And of course, therefore, this demands attention and examination.
Yeah, and it was also very fitting. So we've been talking about doing an issue on magic and spiritualism for years, but in the fall of last year, 2020, we decided to go for it, so to say. And it was quite soothing to think about this issue, because in the fall and winter of last year, we also had to go back to a very strict lockdown again, where we couldn't be together. But talking about magic, finding some rituals, turning more inwards and talking about what day-to-day rituals mean, or how to find some magical moments, some enchantment in your day-to-day life, that felt very soothing. So for the editorial team, it also turned out to be a very, very strangely fitting topic at the moment. Yeah, so I'm happy that we've done that. Point of connection.
It really was. However, we also want to highlight that we did walk into this issue with certain hesitations and with several questions as well. So how come that some groups of knowledge are named philosophy, but others are named spirituality? And moreover, with this surging interest in magic and spiritual practices, it seems that sometimes it's also neoliberalism in disguise, how like health and welfare is offered to us in return for like purchasing certain products. And additionally, magic as trendy could reduce it to an aesthetic feature of Western life, appropriating traditions and practices ignorantly. So while Spellbound is joyful and celebratory, it's not naive. But what Spellbound does offer is a reflection on the definition of magic. It analyzes relationships between human and non-human agencies in post-anthropocentric rituals, shamanist practices for healing and history-making, verbal aspects of spell-making, as well as, of course, the commodification of magic and the ritual economy. So this issue of Kunstlicht overall offers a somewhat narrow explanation and contextualization of what witchcraft, fortune-telling, and other magical practices look like today and why people might need to embody them. On top of this, we have some amazing artist contributions. Alexander Spore and Femi Otte have contributed, and Femi Otten is also the artist behind our Riso cover. On top of that, Naomi Collier-Broms and Amalia Calderon and Emilia Ethemiu have all contributed with spells. And we have chosen also to include some of actually extra spells that they've either produced previously or for this night tonight. So you'll see them throughout our program. And in the issue of Kunstlicht, you will find all sorts of other spells which they've also contributed with. So we're very, very thankful.
Yes, and to add to that, I'm really happy that having said that, we're going to watch one of those spells as we move on to the second part of our lunch. So we're going to watch a burning ritual by Emilia Ethemiu. She sees her practice, the exploration of magic, as a weapon against patriarchal structures and anti-capitalistic practices, which is also why her approach is very DIY, not aimed towards very expensive objects. And after that burning ritual, we're going to watch a talk by Dunja Anisovic, who's going to give a talk on her essay talking about spiritualism in algorithms on social media such as TikTok.
Which are here. So I got to know this ritual from my mother. I think it was Christmas of 2013, and she came to me after someone told her that if you write a wish on a bay leaf during Christmas Eve and then burn it in the evening, one of your wishes will come true. Nevertheless, what I'm going to do tonight is a slightly different. So I'm going to burn leaves as a way to release fears and anxieties. Whenever doing such a kind of ritual, I would say that I think that you should take into consideration is that you should always choose kind of like dates that signify either beginnings or endings. So like a new moon, a full moon, the first day of the week, the last day of the week, etc., etc. So here concentration is the key. It's not only about, whether you believe it or not, but it's mostly about, your intentions, I think. And if you are really overwhelmed and really want to get rid of it, it's enough. So I'm going to use my candle, my special sigil candle. And I will start. You don't really need to write anything down here, just concentrate. So, as I said, you don't really write anything down, you just have to concentrate and start burning the leaves. So once you hear the sound, just really concentrate on what you are releasing. I'm also going to give you a tip. So, dry leaves can be also used for answering questions. So, I will give you an example. If the leaf crackles and burns brightly, then it's definitely a yes. So this is a yes. If not, if it won't burn, and it won't make any sound, it's a no. So
Alright, know the vibes. I made 3 of these videos. This is the last one. If you're seeing this, you're definitely meant to be seeing it. I don't make the rules, okay? And if you saw multiple of these videos, you just got a lot on its way to you. I'm sorry, not my problem. Sorry, that's on me.
Hey besties, it's Joseph. I have another reading for you. If this is on your For You page, then it is for you. Guys, make sure to claim resonates and leave what does not, okay? Also, guys, let me know in the comments if it resonates. Okay, spirit guides, what do they have to know?
And he don't want nobody else sitting it like that. Before that, I'm tryna fuck you, baby. Hopefully we don't have no babies.
Whoever keeps putting those manifest things on my For You page, they're like, he's thinking about you. He's the one. He misses you. You're wrong. He didn't miss me. He wasn't the one. I texted him. The response, not positive. Stop.
So the video you were shown is meant to simulate the experience of scrolling through TikTok's For You page, had you happened to be found yourself on the spiritual side or the spiritual filter bubble of that platform. In the article I wrote for the upcoming issue of Kunstlicht, I argue that these types of videos enact a certain algorithmic imaginary that endows the algorithm with magical properties. Algorithmic imaginary is a term coined by media scholar Taina Booker that denotes a set of beliefs, or in this case, a set of practices or social media objects that articulate certain conceptions users might have about the algorithm, since in the most cases, the knowledge that users have of the algorithms is quite limited. So by using the algorithmic imaginary as the main analytical framework, I analyze in which ways these TikToks articulate the ideas of the algorithm as being a magical entity in the digital environment. So why did this all happen, particularly on TikTok? The interesting thing is that the TikTok is a social media platform that bases their connectivity, that is the means of connecting users with other users and their content through their recommendation system or recommendation algorithm. The main content feed of TikTok is called For You feed, and it presents an infinite scroll of content that is uniquely curated by the TikTok's recommendation algorithm for each user specifically. So this type of connectivity inspired many of the TikTok's clairvoyant content creators to utilize the recommendation algorithm as an instrument in their future foretelling processes. There are various strategies these content creators use in order to emphasize the power of chance, such as not putting any captions or hashtags on their videos and letting the workings of the algorithm or the universe bring the right message to the right recipient. Most common way of delivering these messages is through tarot videos, though other forms are also present, such as channeling messages from the spirit or the universe or the angels, as well as simple signs you are meant to see in your daily scroll through TikTok. The conceiving of the algorithm as a magical instance actually predates TikTok, and it aligns with conceptualization of the algorithm as a magical instance through fetishizing of the algorithm. In that sense, users are interpreting the results provided by the algorithm as being meaningful and serendipitous. Recommendation algorithms are a particular type of algorithm that produce results that are based on uncertainty. In the most basic terms, the way they work is that they learn patterns from a vast pool of examples, which then they apply in the situations they weren't specifically programmed for. So these results are also contingent on feedback loops, that is, the new data the users are constantly inputting. And in that sense, these algorithms are kind of an unstable formation, and in the words of Tarleton Gillespie, they are changed and remade with every click and query. So this sort of opacity and mystery surrounding the algorithm, opacity in the sense that users are not quite sure how they work, given that they are sort of a hidden affordance of many of the platforms we are using, and mystery that is already kind of embedded in their technological properties, has inspired a lot of users to interpret the results provided by the recommendation algorithm as being meaningful and serendipitous. This type of thinking sometimes can slide into a sort of naivety, especially if the fact that these algorithms are heavily programmed, and if the intricate set of labor relationships and network circulation information. I apologize, I need to recompose myself. So yeah, that can slide into certain naivety if the users overlook the fact that algorithms are based on a very programmed nature, as well as that they embed in themselves an intricate network of information circulation, surveillance practices, as well as labor relations from which they're kind of made from. So going back to TikTok predictions, the usage of the algorithm as an instrument in these magic practices balances between affirming the magical properties of the algorithm and instituting magical agency of the creators on the other hand. So on the one hand, by uttering the words, "If this is on your For You page, it is meant for you," the creators are implying that exactly that algorithmic mediation provided that specific reading to pop up on whoever page it is meant to. In these instances, algorithm is taken as an agent of synchronicity, which makes a connection between an internal and external occurrence, in this case, a prediction. On the other hand, some content creators claim that they themselves manifested for a certain reading to pop up on that particular user's page. And by doing so, they institute themselves with magical agency in the process. And while it still retains the magical properties of the digital environment in which they're operating in, they're making it less algorithmically determined and rigid. So given that this is all happening through the platform's environment, one important aspect in analyzing this type of imaginary shouldn't be surpassed, and that is the function of the algorithm for which it is most commonly used in the myriad of digital environments we're browsing on through on a daily basis. So recommendation algorithm is the main agent of what Shoshana Zuboff names surveillance capitalism, which bases its logic on fortune telling and selling. And in this case, the predictive nature of the algorithm is aimed at anticipating users' needs and desires, and thus governing their and modulating their future consumerist behavior and practices towards what brings the most profit to both the platform and the advertisers. In terms of capitalism's relationship to magic, it's also important to note that the initial attitude of capitalism was quite defiant of magic. As Silvia Federici writes in her book, Caliban and the Witch, in which she connects the emergence of capitalism with witch hunts. She writes that the magic seemed a form of refusal of work, of insubordination, and an instrument of grassroots resistance to power, as well as an obstacle to the rationalization of the work process and a threat to the establishment of the principle of individual responsibility. So in its evolution and within the technological evolution as well, capitalism has now managed to appropriate the means of unpredictable, uncertain, and irrational, to establish its overarching dominance while undermining these strategies' initial subversive potential. So these TikToks, or the videos on TikTok, are also unconsciously pondering the tension between the attributing the algorithm with magical powers, while at the same time using its workings for actual magical practices. They reflect the complicated relationship between the subversive potential of magic and also legitimization of metaphysical powers of capitalism, which is now operating through the algorithm. Moreover, this relationship is even further complicated in instances in which content creators allow for the logic of capitalism to kind of penetrate the way they conceive of their content. For example, some creators tend to standardize and, in a sense, commodify their readings by delivering similar messages that are expected to resonate more with the users and create a larger engagement with them. One of those examples is actually a love reading, the reaction to which we had the chance to see in the video that was shown before my talk. Additionally, some creators also encourage the end users or the content consumers to claim or lock the good prophecy by interacting with it through liking, sharing, or commenting. In that way, they're also instituting other parts of TikTok's interface with magical potential, but at the same time, this is also aimed at generating a greater data flow that is both benefiting the content creators and the platform. So in conclusion, this particular intertwinement of technology, magical practices, and underlying capitalist logic that is both ignored and affirmed through these videos represents, in a way, how users and also magic practitioners are adapting themselves to new material circumstances and integrating them into their own practices, while at the same time providing, probably unconsciously, but still providing commentary to the environment they are operating in. And in my opinion, this represents an interesting field of research in which interfaces are not only used to mediate between humans and technology, but also humans, technology, and the otherworldly. So yeah, read all about it in the new issue of Kunstlicht in a little bit more depth, and thank you.
Water spell. You can cast this water spell to attract love into your life, preferably on a full moon. What you need is a coin, a blue candle, a blue ribbon, and a strand of your hair. Light the candle and focus on your wish. Now place the hair over the coin, securing it with dripping candle wax. Go to a stream, lake, or river and drop the coin in the water. Tie the blue ribbon to an overhanging branch. Now make your wish 3 times aloud.
Hi, and welcome back. First of all, I want to say thank you to Emilia FMU for contributing with the 2 spells you watched right before and after Dunya's tiny mini lecture. I really would encourage anyone to read Dunya's article where she expands on these ideas. And also because it is quite a unique take, paralleling the sort of fortune-telling mechanisms of tarot card readings with the TikTok algorithm. It's a fantastic read, and it was an honor to be her editor for this journal. A really wonderful part of making journals is to host launches, because you get to meet the people who you've been emailing with for so long. You get to also gather the editorial team, and what is also such a pleasure is that you get to bring two texts into conversation with one another. And that's, of course, why we've invited 2 extra people to our table. So thank you so much for being here. With us, we have Fabienne Chang, writer and curator, as well as we have Fabienne Rachmadiev, a PhD student at the University of Amsterdam, and also a writer. You both contributed with an article on shamanistic practices in very different ways, which we're going to dive into. But we thought it would be good to bring you to the table, literally, to have you talk about that, because I think that you really contextualize and expand on a very important topic. So Fabienne Chang, we're going to begin in your corner, and I was wondering whether you could expand on your article, the artist as shaman.
Yes, of course. Thank you so much for having us both here tonight. I think just to give a short summary of my text, it's based on the phenomenon of the artist as shaman, and it delves into 3 different works or projects. One by Joseph Beuys, German artist, perhaps the most famous artist to work with shamanism. A. Bronson, Tent for Healing, and also Grace Nitiritu. She's currently working on a project called Healing the Museum. So where each of these artists, they sort of look at shamanism in a very different way and perhaps also use it in a very different way. It was interesting to look at their methods. Why are they inspired by shamanism? How do they use it in their works? But to also think about how do other people, especially art writers, come to call them artists working with shamanism. So, for example, in the case of A.A. Bronson, it's something that's sort of, put upon his work. I think that he has previously mentioned that he sees himself as a healer, and healing is a really big part of his later works. But to obviously, it's something that in Western writing has been conflated with shamanism as a whole, which, is something that is a bit problematic. And, well, we have Joseph Beuys, who uses shamanism in his work to play with a sort of pseudo-biographical means and to also perhaps be a bit radical in his work. And I think that also in his writing, the way that he has positioned himself as an artist, but also how others have written about him, it always sort of really zooms into this idea and maybe also a trope of the artist as a genius, someone who's really creative in a way that not everyone else can do. So I think there's also parallels with the shaman who has a very special position in, spiritual traditions and who is maybe a medium to normal people and to help bring them to a moment of healing. And well, the last case of Grace Nitiritu, she's really perhaps the most critical of it all, and she's really studied shamanism and different traditions. So she's very critical of the way in which shamanism has been co-opted by artists also. But she approaches the practice from this idea that museums are sort of dying organisms that needs to be revived.
In your article, you actually also begin by expanding on where this idea of shamanism originates from in the Western imaginary.
Right, so this is something that stems probably from the 18th century. There's a novel written by Denis Diderot, the nephew of Rameau, and in the text that I've read, it seems to be the first time that the performing arts and shamanism have sort of been brought together, and in the book it's quite framed as quite negatively, actually. And of course, it was sort of, the book was critical of the anti-Enlightenment movement at the time. But I think this is sort of what's put the whole thing in motion. And with the discovery of Upper Paleolithic cave paintings, this is a narrative that further developed. And in the 1950s, when you have all the big books coming out on art history, the idea of the artist as shaman was really cemented in art history, and also the way that we probably learned it during our studies.
Yeah. Cemented back then, and it really echoes into the way we view artists as shamans today as well.
Yes.
Yeah.
So thinking about it, obviously it is a bit Eurocentric in a way. It traces art back in a very, linear way, in which, in a very modernistic, perhaps, light of thinking about art as progressive in a line. And also to think about that, the concept of art itself is a very Western construct.
Yes. Definitely. Couldn't agree more. But I think that your article in particular also deals with art history as a practice. And I would say, Fabienne Rachmaniev, you begin somewhere slightly different. And I was wondering whether you would like to expand and contextualize your article on the female as shaman.
Yes, well.
Oh, sorry, female shamans.
Female shamans. Yeah.
Apologies.
You said the female as
shaman. It doesn't quite make sense, but
yeah.
I think we should stick with your original title.
Okay,
Yeah.
Good. Well, yes, I think my article, somehow in comparison to Fabienne Chang's article, comes from like a different route, so to speak. And because it is a different art history that my article talks about, so it's contemporary art from Central Asia. And shamanism wasn't really a topic for me, but then in researching art from Central Asia, I did come across a lot of shamanic elements and references. And then Central Asia and Siberia are, of course, kind of the birthplace of shamanism, some people say. And so my article looks at environmental catastrophe and the way artists visualize these environmental catastrophes. And then I thought, well, this seems to be ritualistic, or this seems to be some kind of healing practice. And then I started looking in more into shamanic elements and started reading more about shamanism. And then this particular artist I'm discussing in my article is Kazakhstani artist Almagul Menlibayeva. And she has a lot of work that explicitly references female shamans. And this is apparently something that is not obvious because, as you said, like Boyce is seen as some kind of archetypical, or that's the way he presents himself, as an archetypical shaman artist. So female shamans aren't all that visible. So it was for me also kind of a discovery tour in my research to find out why the female as shaman. And so a kind of historical scientific explanation would be that during Soviet times, all kinds of religious practices were suppressed because it should all be socialist and atheist. And because male shamans were more visible, they were more easily persecuted. And then it kind of disappeared into more domestic female spaces. And so the shamanic practices were kind kind of kept alive by females. But this is only one short explanation. I think another, not really explanation, but I think Alma Gumenibaeva, the artist, uses the shamanic and the figure of the shaman to kind of connect all these different histories that aren't apparent for an outsider. And then she performs, not the artist herself, so she's not a Joseph Beuys, because she's behind the camera. She's never in front of the, well, sometimes she's in front of the camera, but in the work I'm discussing, she's not. And so it's the female she puts central, because the female, as the environment that was destructed, was also suppressed. It's still a patriarchal society. In Soviet times, females had a double burden to bear, so they studied, they worked, but then at home they did everything. So I think that's where the female comes in my article.
Yeah. I want to follow up with a small question, because it seems that you're also dealing with sort of a conflict between visibility and invisibility of the female shaman, as it functioned as a sort of protection for a little while. But now it seems that with your article as well, you're bringing it into light, so to speak. And I'm just wondering, is this something that you thought about with the article, or why is visibility also important for you in this context of female shamans?
Well, I think this is tied up with the making visible of the environmental destruction. So my article is about the desiccation of the Aral Sea, which is an almost completely dried up lake in Central Asia, and it has there are various circumstances that led to the lake's desiccation, but it is a really very tragic environmental catastrophe. But it is not very strangely enough, because it was the world's 4th largest lake. It's not very visible, even though it is such a grave environmental catastrophe. So what this artist, Alma Gumenibaeva, does in her video, which is about the Aral Sea, is that she not only visualizes this environmental catastrophe, but also all the histories and all the other elements that are tied up with the history of this environmental destruction, which is also where the female comes in, because the artist wants to show the connection of the female to the steppe environment that was surrounding the Aral Sea. So I think also in a fragment, the narrator, which is a female in the video, says, "The steppe reminds me of my body, which is dry and hairy in patches." And so the Aral Sea is now completely, almost completely a desert, save for a small part in the north. And for the rest of it is surrounded by steppe, which is not a desert, but is in danger of becoming a desert. And so it's not something that has a firm conclusion or anything. So in my article, I don't come to any firm conclusions, but it was interesting for me to see how the environmental waste was tied up to the historical waste of suppressing nomadic people, shamanic practices, and then within these different kinds of suppression and oppression, the female was also made invisible And Melibaeva, the artist, completely subverts this narrative, and she puts the female as some kind of centerpiece within this dried up lake, and performs in a very subtle way. So it's not some kind of witch, kind of recognizable figure that is put in some desert and then performs a spell, but it's all these little elements. I didn't get it at first time, like the first time seeing it. It was like reading more and then seeing more, and then I thought, but this is like the shamanic drum, and I didn't know that. And so for me, it was really a joy to kind of dive into this video and see what it kind of brought forth in thinking about shamanism and rituals, but also in dealing with environmental catastrophe.
Thank you.
When I listen to you both discussing your articles, what really stands out to me is that both of you talk about healing, but in very, very different ways. So, Fabienne Chang, you talk about healing that is almost used as like a tool that the artist present, or that is applied by an artist, where healing in your essay, Fabienne Rahmadiev, is comes much more from like from the indigenous people who are perhaps trying to position themselves in a way in relation to the environmental crisis that they're facing. So I was wondering if you both could elaborate on the notion of healing.
Do you want to go first?
I can go first, yes. Well, I think the healing is very subtle, so it's not something that is made explicit in this video, but it's more kind of evoked by all these different subtle elements, like the soundtrack, which is like this rhythmic drum beat, and so the drum is an important instrument for shamans in performing healing rituals, and so this drum is kind of accompanying all these different images. So you have images of the dried lake, so of the lake turned desert, so the catastrophe has already happened, and then the drum beat also accompanies the images that are the dream of a little girl, and she dreams that the sea has been restored, or that the sea has returned. But the drum kind of connects these images, so then it becomes a kind of like this ritual performance for letting the water return. So that is the healing. So it's kind of the drum wouldn't be obvious to use this drumming healing ritual for such a large thing as an environmental catastrophe. It's maybe in small settings, like someone is sick and you bring the person to a shaman and then a ritual is performed, which is also still the case in many places in Central Asia, although it's all a bit under the radar. Like, you have to know, if you live there, then somebody will know a shaman, and you'll go there as if to therapy. But in this particular setting in the video, this ritual is made for something very big, namely environmental catastrophe. So then the drum, of course, might not be enough. And so she brings all these different elements, like all these shape-shifting animals and all kinds of other elements to it, in kind of, in healing the lake. So you're not healing a person, but a lake.
Yeah, and you almost have to know the ritual to recognize the ritual in the work. It's not very heavily placed upon.
No, but I think in a sense it's also a bit visceral, maybe. Like you do feel it because music in itself, like is visceral, and so because of this persistent rhythm, you will recognize that it is some kind of ritual.
And Fabian Cheng, is the shamanistic or the ritualistic or the shamanistic rituals also very recognizable in the artists that you discuss? Is it also a visceral feeling or more artistically ingrained? Yeah.
Yeah, I think one of the main differences is also that these applications of shamanism, they happen inside of the museum, so inside of this really Western construction as well, instead of more like in a perhaps cultural context in a way. So they're removed from their roots and they're brought into the white cube. Of course, each of the three artists uses it in different ways, but they are trying to heal something that seems to have been caused by, if you will, see it in a very, black and white way, perhaps, Western evils. So, we can think about colonialism or think about the Second World War. So the first one was in the case of Tent for Healing, but also in the work of healing the museum. And then in the second, it was, in the context of Boyce's work. So I think that sort of the shamanistic is used as a way, as a non-rational way, if you will, to deal with problems that have arisen from our very, scientific-based way of thinking. And of course, you could be very critical of the fact that it happens in a museum instead of, wider society in a way, because that could also be something that might temper the effectiveness of these methods. But I thought that it was a very interesting way also of engaging with, discussions, as Grace Ndiritu does, that are very difficult discussions to have in society, but by bringing them into the space of the museum, it's sort of like, can create a sort of perhaps a safer space, because it's a space where creativity is sort of centered, and it allows us to engage with things that you perhaps wouldn't in the Western world.
Yeah, some would say a museum can be a safe space for unsafe ideas, although I'm now forgetting who I'm quoting. But Fabian Chen, you talk as art and shamanism to be like deeply connected or very intertwined. There's no line between the two, at least in the artists that you discuss in your essay, which makes me wonder that Fabian Rakhmadiev, is that also the case for the shamanism in the perspective that you write from it?
Well, I don't touch upon it that much, I think, within the scope of my article, but artists from Central Asia, of course, have, and in this case, Kazakhstan, which used to be a nomadic society, have, of course, a very different art history, and so when they would call themselves a shaman, then the references are different, because on the one hand they would reference a lifestyle and a culture that is destructed for a great part by the Soviets, but on the other hand, when they reference, if contemporary artists, and they do, reference the shamanic, then it's kind of this how do you say it, like a detour towards a connection with a kind of global contemporary art world. So it's kind of more double, because there is no linear Western art history. But what is a kind of a point of connection is that the mentor of the artist I discuss, Tatar descent. And as you know, Joseph Beuys said that he was rescued by the Tatar people and then kind of wrapped in felt and fat. And so what is kind of, well, also like lightheartedly, Chalfin, this artist, he calls himself Beuys reincarnated, like Beuys, Beuys who has returned to his native ground, the steppe. And so, of course, this is kind of a commentary on Western contemporary art, but also a kind of I'm not sure what the word is, but also displaying an awareness of how art, where art is concentrated, what the terms of contemporary art are, and then there's the question, but what do we artists from Central Asia, what kind of artists are we? Because we have a totally different trajectory. But we do have shamanic kind of connections. And so that is kind of interesting for me to see how these artists, on the one hand, they kind of reference the shamanic and art and the relation between them as a kind of commentary on the way it's used in the West, or whatever in the West is. And on the other hand, they do incorporate the elements that are still there and kind of trying to find some kind of relationship with what to do with this shamanic ancestry and knowledge, because it isn't like there's no such thing as real or untouched or whatever shamanism, because it has had so many different influences and so many different other rulers that came and added or took away. And so in that sense, it is a very kind of scattered practice, but also maybe also a very vital practice, because it does incorporate all these new elements, Soviet elements, and now late capitalist elements, perhaps, for, I don't know, probably you can go to a shaman and be charged like a good many dollars per hour, I don't know. So, yeah.
Yeah. There are so many questions I want to ask the both of you. I think there are so many touch points that we could dive into, but I actually have to ask if we have time, because I don't know what time it is. I think we can ask just a final question, which is, this issue very much also points towards the future, as in what spells do we need to make? And obviously yours is an entirely different focus, but I'm just wondering, seeing like practices of artisan shamans, like what do you hope, in brief words, that that these kind of artistic practices can bring to a discussion of healing on one hand, but also spiritualism in an arts and culture context?
Shall I go first? Yeah. Well, I would say in the case of this particular artwork, there is, what I find hopeful is that it made me realize that the lake is not just a lake, and I'm like a human that has nothing to do with the lake, And so what you see here is that now rivers and mountains are gaining rights or whatever, so it's still a very Western setting. But I hope videos like this work, they make visible and they make palpable all these connections that there already are, like the water we drink. Why does it come from the tap? Then you don't know what it's worth, but it's worth a lot, but not money-wise. Whereas if you know where it comes from and you go through all the rituals in procuring the water, then you know how important it is. And so I think all these kinds of rituals make you feel kind of how that you're not loose, or that you're not just however much we might want to be loose as humans. We're not cut off, I guess.
We are fastened.
We're fastened to Earth, yeah.
Yeah, I think, well, perhaps not to end on a super pessimistic note. I think that, having artists reintroduce these practices in an art space means that, on the one hand, they can be swallowed up by the museum industrial complex, and that they, can also be subsumed by capitalism and the art market. So for sure that's, a pitfall that we need to be mindful of. But I also think that we find ourselves in a very difficult moment in time, and conversation is very important, but also perhaps to think about certain topics and injustices with a different toolbox, if you will. So in that way, I think that the museum specifically offers us a space to engage with these difficult topics also from, vantage points of other origins, perhaps more spiritual origins. And I think it is important to look at a lot of these things also from different ways, and to think about, as you mentioned, ourselves not the king or queens of the environment, but as part of the organism. So in that way, I think there's a lot of also possibilities, and it is a thin path to wander. But I think that we should take that time to experiment and allow artists also to lead us, and hopefully what we discover on these ways is something that we can take into our daily lives with us.
Thank you.
Thank you. I really like that we're ending on a note of connection and curiosity for one another. And I think it's very important to listen to each other and to be thankful. And on that note, I want to especially thank everyone who worked on this issue, all the writers, all the artists, the entire editorial team, our amazing designer Corine van der Waal, but also the people here who have graciously invited us here, Felix Meritus, but also the technicians who are making this live stream possible. Thank you very, very much. Yeah, and if you're curious, and if you had some interesting points, please buy the magazine. You can buy it on our website, and we ship it to you as soon as possible.
Yeah, you can follow our work on Facebook and Instagram, of course. And our next issue will be on oil and kinship between petrostates. We're doing this in collaboration with Stavanger Art Museum in Norway. And to end it, the big finale, we just want to say thank you so much for watching. And now we'll watch a spell on saying goodbye and farewells by Amalia Calderon and Naomi Collier-Proms.
So farewell is also a moment of I don't know, suspension, I would say, maybe. Like not rebirth, but like like these spaces in between the being and not being, like, right, something has ended, but you haven't started anything yet, and you're slowly like building up again, but also building down some things, I would say.
I feel like after this conversation, I kind of feel like the best, or like the true meaning of hospitality is almost like allowing your guests the space to not have to perform guesthood, or like that, like relieve them of their role as guests, and just welcome them as, like, I don't know what kind of label, but just not that specific performance of just like tiptoeing and like also being expected to speak and, like, you know, enter into conversation, but that like silence is allowed and over speaking is allowed, and just sort of
I guess the performance kind of dissipates along how intimacy like grows, like if it grows, right? Like the more intimate you are, the more that you subvert these roles, and the more that you are less performing and more actually enacting, I would say. Like I feel happy being a host, but I feel the most happy being a host when people around me are also happy and having the fucking time of their lives, and so am I. Because everything,
you can almost forget your role as a host.
Yes,
because you're having such a good time.
Exactly. It just kind of flows through you. And so it goes back to this idea of shape shifting, but like equally, what you were saying before, equally taking off layers, like performing some sort of vulnerability to reach like a true welcome state.
Yeah, definitely. Like, I don't know, that maybe that is the aim of both guest and host, to like meet as those, you know, defined roles, and by the end of the night or whatever, that those roles have, like, that there's been a stripping away of both, and now you're just left as like a different form. Like.
And what do you think happens when the moment or the performance is over, right? Like when you put on your shoes and leave?
I mean, I think for certain, like in certain contexts, it's definitely like a reflective moment, I would say, of, like, at least as a host, I would say it's a lot, like, I mean, it's, first of all, sort of surveying, like, the residues of the night, like these traces of, like, okay, what exactly happened tonight, and, like, what did we talk about, and what are, like, the material remnants of what happened here.
Yeah, I like the residue that you were talking about before, this idea that, for example, a song has been sung, but then it echoes, right? And sometimes these echoes, if you think in terms of waves and, for example, different birds, the echo travels through land and sea and everything, and it goes up through rivers, and it goes halfway across the continent. So it changes the scale, right? It becomes a different type of sentience that is almost planet-wide.
Yeah. No, it is like I'm imagining not a radio wave, but like sort of like a shock wave that just like goes through everything and like changes in subtle ways the form of the space. Like not just like confined to you, but then everything you touch after that, everything you interact with after that.
And the song stops being the host and starts being the hosted, hostee.
Sugar, spice, and an academic paradise. This was the makeup of this mix for the forthcoming issue of Kunstlicht. But the editorial team purposefully added an extra ingredient to the mix: magic. Thus, Spellbound was born. It rumbles, tumbles, and spins because it has so much to say. Get your copy now at Tijdschrift Kunstlicht.nl.